Good morning, good afternoon. It's definitely afternoon because we are running horribly late today. Welcome back to the Macro Lounge podcast. I'm, of course, joined today by the incredible Queen of Sparkles, who got a sparkly headphones on today, Rachel Mead, live from Tauranga, and of course myself, Chris Bolt. Today we're going to talk about genetics and genetic potential versus hard work and what really matters. There's a lot of chat going on about who's got what genetics and that, you have to have the genetics to, particularly in bikini. And one of the common points, Rachel's heard it all the time, is like, do I have the genetics for this? So what's your thought on, starting off there, Rachel, on genetics versus building, shall we say?
Well, I think there's a lot of points where you can build around genetics. So it's like, yes, there is genetics that will help you, and yes, there is top tier genetics, but I think with bodybuilding, it's much easier to get around genetics than some other sports, because you have different categories and you have, that can kind of help you. So for example, my genetics don't allow me to put on a lot of size. So I do bikini where I don't need quite as much size. So there is ways to work around it. But yeah, so you're always going to have genetics to suit certain things more, but just because you don't have the perfect genetics, I think it doesn't, it's not the end of the world in bodybuilding, where I think a lot of other sports, like say if you're doing athletics, for example, you have to have peak genetics to be able to do well. It's like, who's the guy who's doing really well at the moment? Is it Sam in athletics? New Zealand boy, he's 16.
The young 16, yeah. Damn.
So he's a thoroughbred, is what we call him. He's purebred because both of his parents, I believe, were Olympic athletes. Yeah. And I think his grandparents as well.
He kind of won the genetic lottery on that one. It was like, what are you going to do? Well, I think I'm going to do athletics. Gee, why is that?
Yeah, so it's his parents and his grandparents, I'm pretty sure. So he's like a third generation, high performance athlete. So there's going to be people like that. And clearly, yes, they are going to have an advantage. But I think in bodybuilding, you can offset it a little bit more than in most other sports.
Yeah, I think the reality is in the sport of competitive bodybuilding, or to go extrapolate that out now, because I think competitive bodybuilding has gone beyond the stage. I think nowadays there's probably more bodybuilding done in the world of social media than there is on the competitive stage. But I think genetics has been kind of really distorted by social media, because things like development timelines, where we're seeing these people on social media with the right lighting, with the right angles and the perfectly scrunched shorts. But people scroll, they compare, and they assume that, that's what it should be. And if they're not seeing the progress of themselves comparable to what they're seeing, particularly in social media, they question it. Do I have the genetics? And I think it's really, really important that we understand that genetics only goes so far. I mean, you can be, as you said, you can have the genetics to be a sprinter, but if you don't do the work, you're not going to be Usain Bolt, right? You could have the best genetics in the world, but again, if you don't do the work, you're not going to be Laura Lee or Ashley Kay or any of those sort of people. I mean, they've got genetics and they've got talent. You can't just turn around and say, I don't have the genetics. I can't get lean. I don't have the genetics. I mean, there are rare occasions where that is the case. You're genetically predisposed a certain way. But, I think genetics, you kind of have to look at it almost like, I think from a coaching perspective too, you've got to look at it from how do you empower somebody to understand genetics but be realistic, because genetics do matter. But I don't think they quite matter in the way that people think.
I think it's generally first timers that get really stressed about it, like, do I have the genetics for this? But also you can't really tell if someone has the genetics a lot of the time when you're as a first timer, because that you don't know what they look like when they're lean. You have no idea what's underneath the layers or behind the curtain, as some people say. So it's actually very hard to tell for a first timer when you've never been stage lean before, because at the moment your genetics are a little bit covered. So there are certain things that you can kind of pick out, but a lot of the finer points that people get stressed about actually just comes from getting lean. And it's actually interesting because in bikini, if you look at the top 5 from the Olympia, IFBB, they all have very, very different genetics. You've got Laura Lee, who's a taller girl. She's just over 170, I think. And then you've got Ashlyn Little, who's 5 foot nothing. Yeah, she's little. I thought that was hilarious.
Your parents, they had to go, maybe we should we change the last name?
Her name used to be Ashlyn Brown, I'm pretty sure. I don't I don't know.
So it's her husband's fault, right?
Maybe,
Excellent.
yeah. Yeah, I think so. But anyway, so you've got a huge range. So you've got someone like Ashlyn who is very, very much on the shorter side. She's a little bit more of like a stockier build, not as much as like a wellness athlete, but then you've got Laura Lee, who's very long and lean, and then you've got people who are like kind of halfway in between. Like I'd say Ashley Kay is like kind of in the middle there. She's not long and lean, but she's also not small and like a little bit like thicker. So you've got a massive range there that you can build to do well. It's you're usually going to find some like a place in whichever category that's going to work for you because it works for most genetics. The only one that I think is the biggest issue is my struggle of really, really, really finding it hard to put on size.
Yeah, I don't know if we can blame genetics on that one. It's just, it's like genetics is a base, right? And, you know, when you're talking genetics, you're talking about things like what do your muscle belly shape and insertions look like? Doesn't mean it's right or wrong. They're just genetically how you're disposed. You know, what are your glute insertions? Are they high or low? You can do all of the glute exercises you like, but if you're genetically predisposed to have higher or glute insertions, your glutes will be different shape than if you've got a lower glute insertion. You know, do you have, are your shoulder caps, what are you, do you have wide clavicle width? Like, are you blessed with super wide shoulders and a teeny little waist? What is your bone structure? What is your hip width? Those sort of things that you're naturally born with. That that's your genetics. And yes, you do have people are genetically predisposed to be easily gain muscle, easily gain fat, but they don't necessarily be the limiting factor in competing. Like whether your genetic capability is to get to that extreme level of, say, the IFBB Pro League Pro stages, like the Olympia or the Arnold Classic or Pittsburgh Pro, etc. That's one level of genetic predisposition. Then you've also got athletes in the natural federations that do things like the Natural World Games, that do the Natural Olympia, they've got the Norton Cup, all those sort of things. Again, it's just where are your genetics leaning you towards how you look. It doesn't mean you genetically can't do the sport. It just means you're going to look a certain way no matter what you do.
And generally, there's pros and cons to each. Like, if you have an advantage in one genetic area, you're usually going to also have a disadvantage in another area. It's very rare that you just hit the jackpot and have everything. Like, it's almost unheard of. Even, like, Laura Lee, for example, does not have the jackpot. She really, really struggles to fill out and she flattens out very easily because her metabolism is just insane. So it's even those top level athletes don't have always the jackpot. There's always some kind of drawback. So don't stress too much if you have one of those. Should we go through what some of those advantages are for each of them? Like for your muscle shape, muscle insertions, if you have shorter muscle insertions, it is going to advantage you in the way that the muscle is going to look bigger. It's going to fill out a bit easier because it's shorter. It's like, I like to describe it like having like a piece of paper and then you can like either have it lying flat or you can push it up and it goes nice and rounded. So say it's the same piece of paper, it's the same size, but we're making it more 3D because we're shortening it. So that's the advantage to shorter muscle insertions, but the disadvantage.
Yeah.
Sometimes if you're doing like bikini, for example, it can make you look too jacked. So it really, really does depend on how you've worked your physique. You've just got to build to what your genetics are. So yeah, you can potentially look too jacked, you can look too big in a certain area, it can make it stand out too much because you're supposed to be balanced in pretty much every category. So there's always advantages and disadvantages to all of them.
It's like, fat distribution patterns. Like some people will have or store more fat in their lower body and some will have it more in their midsection. And you'll see, and that can make prep more challenging because you may lose muscle mass in your upper body in order to bring your lower body in line. Particularly with a lot of male bodybuilders, they frequently struggle with bringing in their lower back or that around the abdomen section from the posterior chain. That can be a difficult one. That's genetics, just where their fat sits. And as we know, you can't spot train it, so you just have to keep going until you get into shape. But the thing is, genetics, often I think what people miss is genetics equals structure, is the length of those limbs. Like if you are blessed with really long legs, great, you've got really long legs. Unfortunately, you've got to squat a lot further than a short person. So you're not going to necessarily have the strength on some movements. Doesn't apply to some of those strongmen, which are huge. But things like conditioning, muscle maturity, the density, and the polish, that sort of stuff is earned. One is given, like your shape, your God-given shape, that is, or whatever you want to call it, that's genetics. The other is built. So you can still build it. I've always said, though, genetics is a tough one when it comes to bikini, because if you're not blessed with the shoulder to waist to hip ratio that's ideal for different federations, it's really hard to build into that, because if you build muscle, then you're building yourself into one of the bigger classes. So bikini is one that you're, to a large extent, I think you're born to be a bikini athlete, and then the other extent is when your genetics are again predisposed to a certain way. Then it's kind of doesn't mean the sport's not for you. It just means maybe you've got to do a different class, because that's just the way you're built. Like wellness versus bikini, right? Some girls don't train legs. Why not? Because their legs are too big for bikini. So
Yeah,
what do you
well,
do?
it's even like, for example, like if you have wider hips, or like say narrow hips, for example, are very, very good for figure. Like it really enhances your like X or T shape or the V shape. I don't know, your V taper when you have
X-taper.
narrow hips. Whichever. Well, I mean the top half is like a V, right?
Yeah, we'll go with that.
If you have narrow hips, it's really going to enhance that X shape, because you're like it looks smaller through your torso, your quads look bigger, and your shoulders look bigger. So generally, if you have wider hips, you'll probably end up in like a bikini or wellness type category. But it doesn't mean you can't do it. So because there is girls who have narrow hips in bikini as well. Like that's also
Yeah.
like there's plenty of girls with narrow hips in bikini. I can't remember off the top of my head, but there is a few of the top 10 Olympians, I think. I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head, but I can't. But that's okay. Mind blank. But yeah,
I mean,
it's
but it
different
is.
for everyone. I think the hardest one is probably rib cage. I think
Yeah.
that one's the hardest one to get around. Everything else you can work around. Like, I mean, having wide shoulders is very much an advantage. Like your clavicle width, very much an advantage. If you have narrow shoulders, you can still build up your shoulders to kind of work around it. Still, obviously, not going to be as good as if you just naturally have very broad shoulders, but you can work around it. But I think the hardest one is definitely the rib cage, because you're not really trying to build anything there.
And that's when you run into rib flare, also excessive abdominal development and all that sort of carry on. But again, it's like your genetics really only limit what division you want to do or what federation you want to do. It's like, doesn't mean you can't be a very good competitive bodybuilder. It's just play to your genetics. Some people are, just when you look at, like, say, the Open, men's bodybuilding, most of them tend to not be that tall, because it's harder for those taller guys to put on the mass. And when same with bikini, it's like, there's a certain look. It seems to be the mid classes and the pro leagues that tend to be the highest rewarded. You don't see 6'2" Amazonian goddesses winning, nor do you see a 5'1" other extreme. So it's kind of finding that sweet spot. But genetics are fun, because all genetics is a blueprint, right? It's just somewhere to start. And that's the cool thing about bodybuilding, is you're basically telling your genetics stuff off, because you're using external resistance tools to change the external shape of your body. And to a certain extent, again, this is a base point, but if you don't have the widest clavicle structure, then you're like, okay, well, I'm going to grow shoulders, and then you'll get to the point where you think you might have your shoulders where you want them to be, and then you might go, crap, too big for bikini. Go to figure. It's okay. There's one for everybody, I think.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's just it's different looks.
Yeah, it's different.
That's
different
why we
looks.
have different categories, so that different structures can go into. They can still compete and do really, really well. Because otherwise, if we just had, like, let's say we only had figure. That's a very specific body type, very, very specific figure. I think it's probably one of the most specific, because it has to be that X frame. You have to have the width through the shoulders, the narrow hips, the quads. Like, it's so specific. I'm really struggling with that word.
It's all right. That's what the auto cue things for. So, we can go, oh, that's what you mean.
But everything else you can kind of. There is a place for you, and that's why also they keep creating new divisions. So, like, IFBB just created Fit Model, and ICN we have swimsuit, and I don't know, NABA, they have other categories as well. Who was it? Is it NABA that has Shape? Miss Shape?
Yep. And then what was that new one they've just come out with?
Bikini Athletic.
Yeah. Which is kind of like ICN's
Fitness,
and probably more in line with FMG/WBFF. I don't think there's really an IFBB one, because it's more conditioned than IFBB Bikini seems to be. But
it depends on what part. Depends on where you are. In Europe, I would say it'd be in line. It would be in line with, like, European IFBB Bikini.
Yeah, European, maybe Latin America, but not North America, that's for sure. But yeah, it's that's the thing. There's a home for everybody. But I think one of the things is people blame genetics, and they they haven't. Rich mentioned it earlier. You can't blame genetics until you know what you've got, and you don't know what you've got until you've got lean. So people are blaming she doesn't have the genetics, or I don't have the genetics. They don't even have the right to bring that into the conversation yet, because maybe they've only been training seriously for 18 months. They've done one off season. They did one show and didn't place where they got, and then they go. It's not genetics. It's impatience.
Yeah. Well, it's like when I first started competing, or even before, I thought I had a massive disadvantage because I was like, well, I genetically have 0 glutes. Like, that is a huge disadvantage for me. My glutes are such a disadvantage. Now they're my biggest strength. It's like that's my highlight. My shoulders are my weakness, which I actually originally thought would be my strength. Sadly, they were not. But
what was the first thing I said to you, Rachel, when you walked in the door?
Like,
you'd have
what?
bigger
I thought you were
shoulders for a swimmer.
See, B told me that my physique makes sense being a swimmer. And I was like, well, that's not what Chris said. He said, what the fuck?
Yep, pretty much. I was like, there.
But right. Before I started competing, that's what I thought. I thought my glutes would be an advantage because I had nothing. But yeah, you just build around it, and you never know it could become your strength. Just you haven't gotten to the stage of like being trained. You just need to work it out. Get a coach, please, people. Please stop self-coaching. Even if you're a personal trainer.
Yeah, that's true. But like, it's the work ethic that determines how close you're going to get to what your genetic potential is. I don't think there is that big a gap in genetic potential across the whole sport in general. I mean, yes, you've got your gifted gods, the Olympia champions, the Natalias, going into, all that sort of stuff where you just go, did you just stand at the front of the line when they're hanging? Bikini athletes, here you go. Some of it seems unfair. But in general, the gap genetically across is not huge. And it really does come down to, the work ethic that determines how close you're going to get to your genetic potential. You've got work ethic, and you've got time. That's the key. It's time. This sport is about time. And we've talked previously about Ashley Kay. When you look at her, when she last won her Olympias, her 3 Olympia titles, and you look at her now, or actually there was one, I recently was looking at something where the Ms. Olympia, the bodybuilding Ms. Olympia, the athletes that won that back when it first started, like the Raquel McLeish, the Corey Dunlaps, and all these sort of people that Rachel's never heard of because she wasn't even born when they came out, showing my age. You compare them now, they're small compared to Bikini. And this is just how
I think I've seen the post you're talking about. I think I've seen it. It's crazy. Yeah, even just pre-2000s, like they are significantly smaller and softer than Bikini or even Fit Model. They'd probably still be smaller than most Fit Model.
Like Corey Everson, who was 6 Miss Olympias, considered between her and Linda Murray probably the greatest Miss Olympias. But Corey Everson, you put her up now and she's like, you're like, what the? But that's just, again, who's to say, her genetics, their genetics back in that era, they applied today's training principles, they applied, all that sort of stuff. Their potential is just as great now as it was then. So, there are genetics that tend to favour Bikini, right, Rich? The ones that,
100%.
To be honest, without discouraging people, there are some traits that are advantageous to being a Bikini athlete. As Rich talked about, you've got your naturally smaller waist. What else? Full round glutes, but as Rachel said, that's not really genetic either because she's exhibit A.
You can build that. The wide shoulders. I think the bone structure is the big thing for Bikini, not necessarily anything else, just the bone structure. So it's the wide shoulders, the narrow through the waist. So that's largely your hip bone and rib cage will kind of determine that. And also, I guess, how much you've trained, but that means you can kind of down train it if that's happened. Yeah, so the waist, the shoulders are pretty much the main determinants.
Yep. Yeah.
I'd say everything else you can work around, like the length of your muscle insertions or like where your glutes are inserted. That can all be worked around. Your body fat. I will say, like, with body fat, if you are able to get lean through your glutes quicker than your upper body, that's going to be an advantage. Ladies who get very lean through their upper body and struggle to lose fat from their glutes, bit of a disadvantage because they don't want you to look too hard through the shoulders, but they want you to be quite conditioned through the glutes. Yeah, that one is a little bit of a disadvantage. But again, there's ways you can play with it.
Ways you can play with it. But all of those things, they certainly help, but they're not mandatory, right? Just if you don't have those things, your competitive career is not dead before you even look at considering calling Rachel and say, I want to wear a red bikini, in which she goes, no. The division of bikini across all the federations, it's really evolved over the last 10 years. There's more muscle now than there was 10 years ago. So you've got more, you can be more developed. There's more time that goes into it. As I said, Ashley Kay is a classic example. with time, these divisions change. And so that's going to be interesting to see how, how in the IFBB, how fit model changes over the year. We've seen such a variation in people who are winning their pro cards. You've got girls who are like, well, shouldn't she be bikini? And it's a tough one. But, again, these things evolve. So
well, even the way the poses change. change. So back in the day, bikini used to have like this cross-legged back pose. You'd have your feet crossed. And I would say that would be very, very advantaged for ladies with very wide hips. But with the feet shoulder width apart or wider, you can offset that. If you have very narrow hips, you can make your hips look wider now. Whereas if your feet are crossed, you can't really change that. So the way the posing has evolved has also changed what genetics matter, if that makes sense, hopefully. Or even different federations have different front poses. They've got WNBF has the very front on. So your shoulder width is much more important. You can't hide it because you're facing directly front on. In IFBB, you're more side on. You can create more illusion.
And the IFBB Elite, as Rachel has been giggling away furiously for the last couple of days because I keep sending her posing videos going, what the They, because of the way they stand, and the hands come out, and then they go into their front pose, and it's, we don't see it in this part of the world a lot, but they can stand wider because of the way that if they did that in NPC or ICN or NAB or OCB or ABC, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K.
The rest of the alphabet?
The rest of the alphabet. I think I've run out of letters there. But again, different. You can pose different. And that's where it comes down to finding the federation that speaks to your genetic structure. So, yeah. But I still think work ethic is, would you agree, Rachel, that work ethic is probably as important as genetics? Like, you 100%. You can kind of outwork mediocre genetics. You can't outwork bone structure. Both of those statements are true, but people, they don't really want to hear that. I reckon the biggest equalizer in this competitive environment of bodybuilding, or we should say this socially competitive environment of bodybuilding, the biggest equalizer is time. Muscle maturity takes time, takes years. How long does it take?
I would say that I've been training for this since 2019. So what's that, 7 years nearly. And I was a competitive swimmer before that, so it's not like I was not doing anything before that. I competed in swimming national level for 10 years, so I still have no shoulders.
You went from no butt to glutes of doom in that time.
I did. My shoulders are still non-existent though, and I don't know why.
Probably because I put too many glute day programming in your program. So
possibly.
Maybe we should just change
too many Bulgarians.
No such thing.
But I would say, if you think about a scale of 0 to 100, so 100% genetics, peak genetics, that is your jackpot. If you even have 60%, you should be able to do very well at a high level at 60%. Yep. I'd say 40% you'd be struggling a little bit, but you can still do well. It would be a bit harder. So that's how low the level is of actually how much the genetics are gonna impact how well you can do in the sport. It's not actually as high as people think. You don't need to be at 90% or 100%. You don't need to be there.
Yeah. And most often the people that we do label as genetic freaks, they've already been training for an extended period of time in some sport that gives them a foundation. And it's we frequently call Natalia a genetic freak because of just her physical structure. But she's got a lifetime of experience of dance, and so she can move her body differently, and she's got all of those sort of things. Again, it just comes down to genetics just determine your ceiling, determine how big you can get, or basically the frame that you can hang that muscle on in that shape. Your work, at the end of the day, determines how close you're going to get to your genetic potential. And is that genetic potential enough to be a world champion? Probably for most of us out there, no, it's not. But there can only be one world champion. I feel like Highlander. There can be only one. Again, showing my age, Rachel's going, what movie? Highlander. Okay, good. Do you know who was in it?
I'm not that young. I can't remember, but the quote sounds very familiar.
Right, just note to self and Rachel, Google YouTube links for old crappy
homework. Yeah. But no, I think, it's people get very hung up about it, and I think it matters a little bit less than people think. It obviously matters, but it's not the end of your entire bodybuilding career if you don't have perfect genetics.
Judges aren't going to run up there and say, feedback is, what you talked about last week. You're not going to get feedback and say, oh, Rach, I really admire the effort you put in, but basically just genetically you don't have it.
Just give up.
Just we really appreciate the effort, Rach, but, maybe you should go back to the pool. It's not going to, they don't know, they don't care. It's they're not going to say you're not, they're going to say, look, this is what you can do to this is what they want to see from you. Now, whether or not you can actually achieve that, again, comes down to the time they're putting into it, and to a certain extent, structurally, whether you can achieve it. Like, again, if you've got a waist that's the size of a freaking, nothing, and it's like Isa Pacini was probably a classic example.
I was literally just thinking that, Isa Pacini.
Yeah.
What's her waist, like 19 inches or something ridiculous?
Yeah, it's like, I don't know. I don't think she has internal organs. But, that was what they looked for in the year that she won. And then after that, they were like, no, it's too exaggerated. Now, what can she do about that? Nothing.
See, that's an interesting thing as well, actually, to touch on, is that in different parts of the world, they actually reward different genetics. So, like, in Asia especially, they will really reward, like, a lower glute insertion. Because a lot of Asian girls do tend to have that lower glute insertion. And it looks freaking amazing. But you don't really see it getting rewarded in the States.
And how often you hear people talking about the glute development of Latin American girls, like Brazil? They're different. They're built different. Doesn't mean everybody has to look like that. I mean, it's just a different genetic type of thing. Again, it's like, don't make the mistake of comparing yourself to somebody who, one, has a completely different physical structure. There's no point comparing yourself to somebody who's got shoulders that are as wide as a barn house when you are just genetically not blessed in that way. There's no point comparing yourself to somebody who's got, from Asia, who's got those beautiful glute tie-ins that are lower, or to, say, somebody from Brazil or something who's just born different.
Brazilians need to just have their own league, because I don't think they should be allowed to compete against us mere mortals.
Yeah, that's true. That should be their own federation, really. It's like you've got Brazil versus the rest of the world.
It's just unfair.
And every girl's going, yeah, I'm not going to go to Brazil. So, common mistakes is falling back on genetics, saying, I don't have the genetics, or having an inflated perception of how good your genetics are, and thinking that you can coast on genetics. So, not training hard enough, not eating enough, poor posing, to hiding your strengths, because you think such and such poses this way that you should pose that way. Well, that's not necessarily the case. That's poor stage presence. That's not genetics. That's posing. No. Sometimes it's, I read something the other day, it says, sometimes it's not your DNA, it's your strategy.
100%. Especially posing. Posing is very much, like, it's not very genetic. Obviously, if you are a lot more coordinated, and yes, that can come down to genetics, that's going to help. But you can be very uncoordinated. Like, so I made a post the other day, I am not known for my coordination.
Yeah.
I'm not.
That's a hell no for me.
So as a reference for people who don't know me very well, when I was teaching, I literally had a few students in each class who, they started doing this by themselves. I didn't even tell them to do this. Whenever there was a computer cable, like, charging, they would warn me so that I wouldn't trip over it as I was walking around the classroom. And they did it without even thinking. They didn't realize. They would just be, oh, miss, watch out, there's cable. And, like, they didn't really do it to anyone else, but because they knew that I was going to trip on it, because I was constantly tripping on things. And then they also knew to just ignore me when I dropped my whiteboard markers. I would be playing with them in my hands while I was speaking to the class, and then I would drop them. And then after a while, they did stop being like, hey, miss, you dropped your marker, because they realized that, yes, it's a very frequent occurrence, and I'm just going to continue talking and I'll pick up later. So yes, you can be uncoordinated and still get good at posing. It just takes a lot of practice.
None of this, by the way, I'm finding surprising in the slightest. I'm just like, yeah, can see that.
So yes, obviously, those who are graceful have an advantage, but just put in the work. Posing isn't something that you have to be coordinated at. It's muscle memory to an extent.
It doesn't have to be a natural talent or a natural gift. You can be born with 2 left feet. And practice. So it was like, Allen Iverson, basketball player, used to play for the 76ers way back. And he just said, practice. And when you play the game, you're just practicing to practice. And it's the same when you compete. You practice all the time. When you get up on stage, you're just practicing for the next time.
Exactly. And then because posing, it does help you, enhance your strengths and hide your weaknesses. So if you aren't blessed with the smallest waist, turn slightly more side on, it will make your waist look smaller. Actually, speaking of that, I saw something on Reddit, it was quite funny. So Alison Tetsu, who is known and I believe to be just one of the greatest structures ever, but she also likes to enhance that in her check-ins, and she wears like this black check-in bikini against a black background, and it's got like this side tie, and she ties it exactly where the side of her waist is, so it brings her waist in another like 2-3 centimeters just because it blends into the background. So in all her check-in photos, her waist looks like a good 2-3 centimeters smaller from a 2D aspect than what it actually is. So there is a lot of points where people will use tricks like that to just pretend that they are looking significantly better than they are. So also don't get hung up on that.
It's like, genetics is just giving you a ceiling. It's like at the end of the day, I would say, particularly in bodybuilding, probably it's less, maybe it floats underneath genetics. It's less about the genetics and more about the ego. Bodybuilding can be rife in that. There's a very large number of bodybuilders who walk around with an inflated ego of their physical dimensions, shall we say. If it's genetics, the way you're built, it's not your fault. If it's genetics, you don't have to sit with the idea that you may need another 5 years. Somebody says you might need another 5 years. You might say, well, actually, I gain muscle pretty easily, so I can do in 5 what other people can do in 1. Sometimes you don't have to accept that it's going to take, that building is going to be slow and boring and visible. Sometimes it's just going to happen quick. And other people, the time factor can be really confronting. It's like your genetics just restrict how quickly you can build and gain muscle. Doesn't mean you won't get to the same point as someone who got there earlier. It just means it's going to take you longer, which ultimately could be in your benefit anyway, because you're going to build a bit of quality muscle. You're going to build a fuller, a harder look, as opposed to just sometimes those rapid gainers, the muscle's almost fluffy looking. It's soft. It doesn't have the density. So, just because you're not there now doesn't mean you're not going to be exceptional later on. If you can stay with all that boring shit, you're going to beat the gifted athlete who's expecting the applause and the praise. There's a lot of talented bodybuilders that have come out around the world that have been destroyed by somebody's just having longevity, who's quietly grounded out and snuck up in the background and said, I've done the work, I've done the time, and now I'm here. Whereas somebody who's just relying on their ego and their God-given genetic talent, they will stop early. It's like the number of times you see juniors who come in with a hiss and a roar, and 23, they're gone.
Oh, 100%. So that's actually something I noticed a lot when I was both swim coaching and teaching, was that the kids who were very naturally gifted, they were usually quite lazy. Like, they never worked as hard as the kids who were, like, mediocre good. Like, it's the kids who come second and third, they're the ones who usually work the hardest. Like, they are fighting for that first place. But the one who comes first place without trying too much, they generally get a really bad work ethic. Obviously, you've got exceptions to that rule, but majority of the really talented ones really don't last because they have this expectation that everything's going to come easy. They will just win every time. And then as soon as they don't win, they really struggle with it. And it destroys them, like their mentality. And they're like, oh my God, what? So, okay, then I guess I'm just going to quit. I'm obviously no good anymore.
Yeah. And that happens a huge amount. But I think one of the really important things in this particular field, whether you're competing on stage or you're competing in the world of social media recognition, is maybe instead of obsessing over your weaknesses, start focusing on what your strengths are. If you have really great delts, then build an upper body balance. Don't skip leg day. If you've got amazing glutes, like Rachel's done, lean into that. We've often frequently said Rachel's one of the few people in the world who grows glutes by wearing a bikini. It's weird, but that's a genetic gift. I think
it's my hip structure. I think it is my hip structure, because even when I first started competing, my first shows, I still looked like I had a lot of glute fullness, and I still had zero glutes back then. But I think it's the way my hips are structured. Is in that back pose, I get this major roundness towards the top, just the way my muscle sits, even when there's no muscle there. So that one is definitely my hip structure. I'm very blessed genetically with the way that my hips are structured for that back pose. If I was doing the cross-legged one, I'd be screwed.
Yeah, you'd be screwed, yeah. I mean, but the thing is, you're very good with strategically posing to amplify your structure. Like your side pose, originally, or your front side pose, originally wasn't really a strength, but you've managed to, through practice and consistency, turn that into a strength. And we've used that in competitions in the past, where I've said to you, go stand next to that girl and hit your front pose. You're like, oh no, she's just like, just go stand next to that girl and hit your front pose. And they just go, shit. Because your posing can amplify your structure. Same as suit color and cut. They can change your proportions.
100%.
If you get a good suit, Rachel can speak to this a lot, like the number of times she's like, we've been watching something and she'll go, that girl's not wearing a suit, right? She needs to bring it up, pull that up over here. I'm like, oh, yeah, good point. But your suit cut and the color, they can change your proportions. Your genetics are fixed, right? That's it. It is what it is. But your presentation and what you do with it is not. So
Yeah, so the genetics are your bone structure is one tiny little aspect of what goes into bodybuilding, because then you've got how lean are you, how conditioned are you, how much muscle have you built in a certain area, what's your tan like, what's your makeup like, what's your hair like, what's your suit like, what's your posing like. So you've got at least I've just counted 7-8 things, and that's only one of them. And the top 3 are obviously, so yeah, you've got your bone structure, then you've got your muscle, and then you've got your conditioning. But those are definitely the top 3. So even then, 30%, you've still got another 60% to make up for it.
only one of those things can't change. You can't change your bone structure. Everything else, work it. Genetics, I think it becomes dangerous in this sport when you use it as a reason to quit, to say, I just don't have the genetics for it, or you fall into that comparison trap, because the reality of it is, unless you're actually comparing yourself to somebody who's physically got a very, very similar bone structure, what are you looking at? And social media comparisons, they don't show how long this been's working on it. They don't show the failed off seasons. They don't show any PED use, because they sure as hell won't talk about it. And that mental toll of just keep looking at somebody else and just saying, I'm not built for this. It can weigh really heavily on you. So I think the goal is to be self-aware, not to self-sabotage yourself. And that's
so it's I can say I am never going to be able to do figure or wellness. I am not built that way, but I can do bikini. So some people will say something else. They will say, I could never do bikini because I just pack on muscle too easily. So they can fit into wellness. So it's very much don't use it as an excuse. It's not, I struggle to put on muscle, I guess I can't do bodybuilding. It's okay, well, I guess I'll do the one that requires less muscle than the other ones.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's your genetic, if you like, limiting potential, is you have to be realistic that genetically you are a certain way. Now, that doesn't mean you can't be a competitive bodybuilder or you can't have a fantastic photo shoot physique, but you've got to be realistic. So, there are realities around the sport.
I'm going to say, sorry, I'm going to interrupt you there. One thing on that point is when I say I could never do figure or wellness, technically I could. I could go into it if I wanted to. I could technically. So if you really like that look and you want to go for that look regardless of genetics, go do it, is what I'll say. Just when we're being realistic about expectations of how you will do in that category is more kind of where we're going with that one. But if you want to do that category, it does not matter what your genetics are. Go do it. If that's the look you like, try it.
Yep. And again, the result doesn't matter, right? As long as you're happy with the look that you put on stage. I mean, there are some realities, to be factual. If you have extremely narrow clavicles combined with a wider waist, that's probably going to make it to be at a top national level or world level a little harder. If you're slow at responding to building muscles and slowing your progress, doesn't mean you won't get there, but the reality of it is it will just take you longer. If you predisposed to some form of genetic frailty, so to speak, where you don't have the recovery ability, that can cap where you're going to go. But there are levels for everybody. You've got your local, you've got your regional, you've got your national, you've got your pro levels. Genetic success doesn't have to mean the Olympia. It can be just to win a local show without worrying about, did I get a pro card? You can love the sport and competing and displaying your physique and let's face facts, more people probably know social media athletes now than know who's the reigning Ms. Figure Olympia. That's the reality of the sport. You can love the sport without chasing that pro card. And you can love the sport, when I say it's the sport of bodybuilding, which is using resistance training to change the way you look, without chasing the pro card and without going for that pro level. It's genetics, just the ceiling. Do what you want with them.
It's honestly your choice. I mean, clearly I'm probably never going to look like a wellness or figure girl, no matter how hard I try. That's the realistic side. But that doesn't mean I can't try.
Maybe not 2027, maybe 2028.
No. But the other important thing I think to remember is that when we talk about the levels, is those levels, do consistently go up. So it is important to remember that as well. So if you've got people competing at a national level, a lot of those girls would have been competing for 5 years. Yep. They would have been making improvements over those 5 years. So for someone who's just coming in, everything's constantly moving upwards. It's very, keeping up with bodybuilding is difficult, which is why there's caps to how much muscle you can have in each category. If you look 2020, the amount of muscle that they needed now would, like at the Olympia even, would probably struggle to get a pro card these days. So it is because those Olympians, same thing, like Ashley Kay, how long has she been around? Nearly 10 years in the pro league at the Olympia.
No, she's longer though. It's been 10 years since she won the Olympia.
Oh, there you go. 10 years since she's won the Olympia. So she's obviously been progressing every year, which then changes the standard. So that's, I think, is also very important to remember, because there's a lot of information out there that bikini used to be like a 3 to 5 year physique. Definitely not the case anymore.
I think they initially pitched it as you can join a gym and 6 months later you can compete on the Olympia stage, which I always hated, because it's like no, those bikini girls, they train their asses off. You know, they're some serious athletes. They're just building different. Again, it's I don't know. I think genetics is a bit of a crutch for a lot of people. It's like, I think instead of asking about your genetics, maybe you should be asking, do you love the process? Are you willing to give this passion, this sport, 5 to 10 years? Are you improving year over year? Are you comparing yourself fairly to other people? Those are the sort of things that are going to tell you more than staring at somebody else's shoulder width and going, they're just genetically blessed.
I'll say, it seems to be a common trait in bodybuilding, this is genetic, to be a little bit spicy in the brain.
Yeah, I don't think you'll get an argument from me on that one.
So yeah, that seems to be a helpful trait, and yes, it is genetic. So yeah, a lot of athletes, even at the top level, tend to have some kind of spicy trait, like ADHD, autism. It's pretty common, because you get very obsessed. It's one of the main traits is obsession, which bodybuilding becomes an obsession, and that really helps.
So maybe the question shouldn't be, how wide are your shoulder structures? Be, what level of spiciness are you? This is the important question. I think that makes sense.
Exactly.
So
it's a mental genetic advantage.
Yeah. Do genetics matter? Of course they do. Are they everything?
No, absolutely not.
So, and like most people, they'll never hit their genetic limit. They might hit their impatience threshold because they're too tired to keep going. But most of us will never get to what we genetically are capable of. I know I certainly haven't. I tapped out, after my competition. I went, stuff this. Did I get close to my genetic potential? I thought so at the time, but now, I look back and go, no, I could have pushed harder. So it's
also as knowledge keeps improving, because like some people, and also we are so far behind in New Zealand compared to the rest of the world. What we get with knowledge a lot of the time is 5 years behind the rest of the world. So it is very difficult for us, like sometimes, like we don't have any of the big sports science centers that they have in the States. Like they are putting the, what are they called? The electromagnetic thing that stimulate the muscles.
Yeah. I've tried that once.
They
it's not
measure
fun.
it's not fun, but they'll measure like how much your muscles can contract. Like there's a lot of things that we don't have. And then, just knowledge just keeps going up. Back in the day, they didn't know how much protein you're supposed to have. They probably really limited themselves on their potential because they just didn't know any better.
It's like the age-old discussion of, would Arnold Schwarzenegger beat Ronnie Coleman? Well, the Arnold Schwarzenegger of his peak in 1974 and 1975 versus Ronnie Coleman at his peak in the early 2000s. Well, no. Stand those two together. I don't care who you are. You can be romantic and say Arnold would win because he's the greatest of all time. Well, no. Ronnie would smoke him. Absolutely crush him. But if with as good as Arnold was and way back in the dark ages, if he had the knowledge, the nutritional knowledge, the training knowledge, the PED knowledge, all that sort of stuff that they have now, would he still be that far better than everybody else? And I would say yes, because he didn't have the best genetics even then, but he had the best work ethic. And that guy, he outworked everybody. He outground everybody. That was it. So you put that in now, then genetics sort of comes out of the question. It's like, yes,
and also remember, strategy is important too. So when it's not just working harder is harder, working smarter as well.
Yeah.
Like that's what we're saying when we say maybe you just don't know better. It's having a good coach. That's why even personal trainers sometimes will get limited to thinking, oh, that's just my genetics, because they just don't know what that next level up is. So if you hire a coach who knows what they're doing in this area, they can then, I guess, open up to the next level. They can open up their floor to a new ceiling. So it's all about moving up. A lot of it is knowledge. Only pretty much bone structure is the limit, is the main genetic limitation. That's about it. Everything else you can build around. It's not as important as people think.
That's true. And again, as I say, don't get hung up on your genetics. It's like, your genetics are your genetics, and thank your ancestors for what you've got. It just means you've got a different... Your genetics just dictate what eventually you will look like. It doesn't mean it's going to be better. It doesn't mean it's going to be worse. It puts a ceiling that you can achieve. and it gives you a goal to strive for. So anyway, that's probably enough about genetics. I mean, we've always got into some science and technical stuff there, which would have been well outside Rachel and my wheelhouse. But we would be remiss if we didn't sort of start to wrap things up today with the Sharon's segment, or otherwise known as Brooks Follies, I think we should call it. One of these days we might have to do, and cutting to our live field reporter, Brooke, and just get her to read them out. She'd probably enjoy that. We had a couple this week, Rachel. We had a couple that stood out anyway. We had one from Marina Hill, which I don't know if it's a Sharon, but it was funny. She sent through, and hopefully our wonderful producer will figure out how to do this, because Rachel and I will just stand here and go. But she sent through a check-in picture, which what made her decide to buy a tripod. And basically the check-in picture was, you could see that she was standing in the background doing her front, side, back pose. But all you could see was a cat's face going. I think that's a
cat,
little shame. Yeah, little cat. It was very cute.
I think it's a very common problem.
Yeah.
It's a very common problem, I think. I've seen a lot of cats in check-in photos.
Speaking of which, mine's been very well behaved today. She hasn't barely
I
said
know,
a
we
word.
haven't heard. Yeah, our guest speaker has not arrived.
No. What else did we have there?
We did. We got a couple from the amazing Brenda from ICN.
Yeah.
So back in 2016, as a competitor, I lost my shit because no one had emptied the dishwasher.
I'm just impressed that Brenda actually cursed, and I've seen this in writing.
Yep.
So I was like, ooh, she must have been spicy on that day, because, as you know, Brenda does not use. Anyway,
so
please.
nobody emptied the dishwasher. There were dishes all over the bench, which meant I had to clean up before I could meal prep. I was so hangry that I threw a coffee cup away because I can't throw for shit. The coffee cup hit the stain. I thought she meant just throw it away, like put it in the bin.
No.
But then I'm reading the rest and I'm like, oh no, she actually threw it. So the cup hit the stainless steel fridge. There is now a permanent reminder of my patty on the fridge door.
I'm very disappointed, Brenda. That's 2 curse words that Rachel's obviously wearing.
That is quite funny though, because like just the little things that set you off.
See, I would get a frame, mate, and I would print it out and I would put it on the fridge with just around it, so that I would claim that particular Sharon as being a highlight of.
Maybe it's more of a reminder for people to stack or empty the dishwasher than it is for the tantrum. It's a reminder for the dishwasher to be cleared.
Okay, that raises the age-old argument that the person who fills the dishwasher, is it their responsibility to empty it, or does their responsibility end when the door's closed?
I would say it's the first person to open the dishwasher and realize it's cleaned.
And how often is that you, and you close the dishwasher and just walk off?
To be fair, Ed does the same thing.
Oh, we all do, until we realise we have no clean dishes, and the only place you can get them is out of the dishwasher, and then you go, crap, I have to empty it, which is slightly annoying.
So, yeah. Well, we actually had 3 baskets of clean laundry at one point a couple of weeks ago. 3 baskets of clean laundry sitting there waiting to be unloaded.
It was 3 places for Sanjay to sleep, basically.
Yes.
I have one that somebody reminded me. Well, I know we got another one from Brenda, but I think we'll save that one to next week, because that was a good one. I actually was talking to somebody the other day about one that I had when I was doing registrations at one of the first NPC IFBB Pro qualifiers in Thailand. And this gentleman comes in, and it's packed. It was a big show. Just me sitting there going, hi, welcome to Thailand. Yeah, nobody speaks a lick of English because they're all from all over the place. And this kid comes in and he is losing his shit at me. Like, literally, he is going absolutely just nuts. Because he's not registered, he's not entered, and I'm like, I mean, I can enter you. I said, but I need your NPC registration and all this sort of carry on. And he was not having a bar of it, and he was, getting right up in my face. And of course, as you imagine me, I'm just like, well, that's nice. Do you want to continue with this? Because we can, very calmly. And then, so he goes off and he's going on. He said, I have come from wherever it was to, competing for the pro card. I'm going to be an IFBB pro. I was like, great. Anyway, so we went through this for a little while, and then I looked on through the registration software, which sort of allowed us to look at other things that were going on as well. He was in the wrong country.
So he had a show in a different country.
And he was
That's a big one. Oh my, a week early too?
Yep. He was, not only was he in the wrong show, he was in the wrong freaking country. And I was just like, oh, dear me. And he actually thought he thought he was in Taiwan. We're going to prep brain for that one.
That's why if you're on prep, you should not be trusted with travel plans.
No, that's what we will have a producer for, so you can take care of that for us. Anyway, we've probably indulged these people. Apparently, it's my turn to do the closing this week, Rachel, so there's no pressure. You did get a passing mark, and you didn't actually even need to send any bribery cat photos, which, by the way, she did do just in case she got in trouble, which I think was dirty Paul, because I can't do that. That's not fair. So if I get this wrong, I'm going to blame Rachel. I'm going to say
You
she
can
got
take a
away
cute
with that
photo of Rusty. She will accept photos of Rusty, I think.
Yeah, but because Rusty's right there. She sees Rusty all the time. It's not quite the
She
same.
still
Your
loves
cat,
cute photos of Rusty.
yeah, it's true. But your cat does get extra grace because, one, he's very, very handsome. And two, she just melts whenever she sees that cat. It's not fair.
It's because he's amazing.
So we'll try this now. All right, team, before you head off, and if you've got something out of today's episode, do us a favor and like, subscribe, leave a comment, or follow us on YouTube or Spotify. It helps the podcast way more than you think, and it means that we can keep having these honest conversations. So thanks again for listening, and we'll see you all next Monday.
You added a word.
Shit. It's not bad then. I'll give myself an A+.
It's a tie. It's a tie.
It's a tie.
So,
All right.
everyone, enjoy your week.
See you guys next Monday.
Signing off.